6 new stories and let's not meet Reddit. Part 2. Story 1. I ever tell you you look like Jesus, man? By Silver 721. In my junior year of college, I went to a party across campus at the creative writing department. I was blasted on edibles and the scene was lame, so I just grabbed some munchies and dipped. As I was walking back to my room, I realized that I was obliterated, probably the highest I had been in my life up until that point. It was very dark outside, probably around 8 p.m. It was pretty deserted despite it being relatively early, probably because it was blisteringly hot and nobody wanted to be outside. I walked in front of a dorm that I didn't live in, and a man sort of appeared out of the darkness and said to me, "I ever tell you you look like Jesus, man?" I was very confused because I had never met this man before in my life. I was trying to figure out if I had known him from somewhere, and being high just made the whole interaction even more surreal. "No, I don't think so. I'm sorry, where do I know you from?" Then he said, "Oh, I guess you don't know me. I have a friend who lives here. Can you get me into this building, man?" Immediately red flags were going off in my head. He looked like he was in his 40s. The school I went to had very few non-traditional students, and his opener was just bizarre and basically already told me that this was a guy who was trying to be deceitful. I was just staring at him bug-eyed for probably an awkwardly long time, and I think he could tell that I was scarred shitless. He had a sweatshirt on, which was another red flag considering the heat, and reached an arm under the jacket. Time slowed and I thought that I was about to be mugged or worse. He then opened his jacket and said, "See? No knife. No gun. I'm a good guy. You don't need to worry." This made me think that I needed to worry. There were so many less sketchy ways to explain his situation if he had a legitimate reason to need to get into that building, which I couldn't do anyway since keys could only get you into the dorm you lived in. It might have not been the smartest decision because I am not very athletic or fast, but I just sprinted out of there at full speed. I was too afraid to even look behind me, and I didn't even check behind until I got inside of my building. It didn't seem like he had followed me. I was on the school paper, and as part of that, I would routinely check in with the campus police to see if there was anything interesting going on worth writing a story about. A few days after my encounter with Scary Guy, the officer I would usually talk to told me that they had to arrest a man trying to break into a dorm, the same one that Weird Guy was in front of. I asked if the person they arrested matched the description of Weird Guy, and he did. Apparently his girlfriend, who was like 15 plus years younger than him, by the way, had lived there and texted him that she had broken up with him, and he tried to get in to confront her about that. He was apparently found trying to open a window on the main floor by another officer, maybe 20 minutes after I had run away from him. In hindsight, I feel bad that I hadn't called the campus police on the guy. It just wasn't even on my radar, and I didn't want to be around any cops high out of my mind. I was just glad that it ended well for all involved. Story 2. I almost became another statistic in a Bulgarian park at 4 a.m. Bye. WKND_Worry0R. This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still get anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who study abroad. I'm originally from Germany. I'm 32, turning 33 this year. The first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable, cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend, let's call him Ben. He's about a year younger than me and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly rundown architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and its various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice, hot summer, and I was enjoying myself until one particular night. I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and decided to head home. I should describe the layout of the city, as it's quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts, there are very big parks stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15-minute walk, which I'd done many times. People had warned me about occasional attacks/muggings/robberies, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west, so I had to leave them after 5 minutes and continued alone with my music. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I came to a park I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks, closer to where I was living. Being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving even at 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees, but as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that someone was approaching him from behind through the bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard someone approaching. It all happened so fast, I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was happening. You need to understand that this all happened so fast, until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I turned and ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind me even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked, and I couldn't speak straight, but I didn't need to say much as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the big window with the rock. When the glass broke, he finally ran away. What makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and then killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, put my music back in, and walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterward, I was shaking at home, locking every door. I couldn't sleep well, and the next morning I discovered I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I'm forever grateful that this turned out okay. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing might have saved both me and the guy on the bench. If I hadn't entered that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think I learned that there are some situations you cannot control. Stay safe out there, folks, and maybe don't walk in the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. Story 3. The Sinister Apartment and the Galega Warning. By false_code 3364. This all happened last night. Today I went out with a friend to look for some houses to rent and move in with my wife. I looked at a massive house, everything was fine, until a friend of ours arrived and said there was an apartment up ahead and asked us to go there, since he was going that way. Cool, then. We went and, when we got there, I greeted the owner and he invited me to look at the place. But I went in alone with my friends, for some reason, stayed outside. And then it starts to get weird. As we went up the stairs, the owner said that the rent was 700 Brazilian reals, but that he would do it for me for 600 Brazilian reals. Nice, right? A discount, who doesn't want it? When we got there, I noticed that there was an apartment next door with an eerie atmosphere. The windows were open, and the only lighting seemed to come from a TV on. I even thought about asking if he was also available, but as the owner called me straight away to see the other one, I left it alone. The apartment was simple. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, small bathroom, small rooms. Room okay, but it had a balcony that provided very good ventilation. I liked the place and was already considering renting it when the most sinister part came. I stayed outside the apartment. There was a gap between AP1 and AP2. Then, the owner went to the bathroom. Suddenly, out of nowhere, from apartment 1 and the one with the strange climate, a blonde woman appeared. She appeared at the window whispering something, and I could only understand the end. Don't rent it, don't rent it. This lasted about 10 seconds. When I noticed, she had already left the window, and the owner was returning from the bathroom. Shit, I got goosebumps at the time. I thanked the guy and said I would think about it. I even wrote down his number out of politeness. But who will live there? I swear to you, it was too sinister. She appeared out of nowhere and I felt a bad energy. I told my wife, and she doesn't even want to either. LOL. Story 4. Worst hinge date I've ever been on. Bye. Acceptable underscore injury 754. I told my friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. It happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I have to rely a lot on the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age. We had a good convo and then we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant not far for either of us to drive, so it was easy. She was very pretty in person, and we got along great. During our conversation I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned she had a roommate, whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much, and she said he's harmless, so I kinda let it go. We had a few more drinks and were there about another hour, and at her suggestion she said we should go back to her place, and I mean I wasn't going to argue it, she was hot lol. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin and tonics and was fine, and again she insisted. I thought it was weird, but I didn't care. We went to her house and she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it, it was already open, which I found very odd because she said she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either. I asked her whose it was and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. It just didn't make sense, and before you could say anything she just kissed me and out her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, she was pretty hot and I quit caring about the cereal lol. We started fooling around and I went to close the curtains and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed and my back was to the window when she let out a huge gasp. A scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window. I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was gonna fuck the dude up, or try to, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane, and she told me he does this and goes away. And I asked her, you know this is your ex? And she said yeah, and to not worry about it. At this point he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all scared and kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I know this dude is a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar, and I was terrified. At this point I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal. I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I will kill you both. I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything, I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month, but I honestly have no idea what the fuck I was into. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her in there again. Strories 5. Creepy bus driver with bad intentions. By Sensitive Gazelle 790. This story happened to me in 2022, when I was around 24 years old. For a bit of context, I am non-binary, assigned female at birth, AFAB, but let's say I look very feminine. At the time I was studying in Paris and renting a room in the house of the mom of my boyfriend at the time, in a city that was more than an hour away from Paris but 20 minutes from Versailles, another important city in France. It was in winter, during a school break I think, and I was going out in Paris to see a longtime internet friend for the first time. She turned out to be a very toxic and problematic person whom I'm not in contact with anymore, but the story is not about her. I must say that I have a rather petite frame because of an eating disorder I was dealing with ever since I was a child, and I've always looked much younger than my age. Even these days I need to show my ID when I want to buy alcohol. On the day of my encounter with my friend, I was dressed casually with a skirt. Our encounter went very well, but since I lived far away and planning to go to my boyfriend's house later, I had to leave before midnight because the public transportation would become scarce after 10 p.m. and I had around 2 hours of transit to get there. Unfortunately, I didn't leave early enough, so I managed to get a train until Versailles, but would have to wait almost an hour to get a bus to go to the nearest city from my boyfriend's house, where he would then pick me up with his car. While I was waiting near the train station, I noticed a group of bus drivers who were smoking and talking to each other. I approached them to ask which one of them was going to drive the bus to insert the name of the city closest to my boyfriend's house, and one of them, a small man with gray hair, who was probably in his late 40s, early 50s, told me that it was him. He noticed my skirt and said that I must be freezing, so he offered me to go heat myself in the bus and wait there until the time of the departure. I gladly accepted, as I was indeed freezing, and while he was walking me to the bus, which was parked in a very dark corner with no lights, he got very close to me and started to act very familiar with me, asking me about where I live and where I was going to and such. I was feeling uneasy and uncomfortable, but I was raised to be polite, and I've always been a people pleaser, so I answered all his questions with as little details as possible until we reached the bus. He opened the door for me, and while all my instincts were screaming me to not go in that bus, I ignored them and got in anyway. I sat at the front of the bus, where there was a bit of light, but mind you, I am black and even in the dark it would have been very difficult for anyone to see me. Aside from the other bus drivers who saw me leave with the driver, no one knew I was in that bus. Anyway, the second I got in the bus, things got even weirder. He threw his lit cigarette away and got in the bus with me as well, all while telling me a bunch of anecdotes about the bus, about how the bus was actually designed to transport the French football team, and how there was a huge table and even bathroom at the back of the bus, and that I should come in the back of the bus with him to see. He suggested me twice to come in the back of the bus where there were absolutely no light, and this scared me even more, so I texted my boyfriend, Mike, no come tonight. Weird bus driver. Call me ASAP, while ignoring the driver rambling. He then came back to the front of the bus and stayed in the corridor, blocking my way. He talked about random things I don't remember, and all the time his eyes were fixated on me, especially on my phone that was in my hand, and my knees/thighs. All the time I was praying for my boyfriend to see my message and call me, and when he finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief. The driver must have seen the face of my boyfriend on the screen of my phone, because he took a step back and told me that he was going to smoke another cigarette outside. I answered my phone and told my boyfriend everything that was going on while looking out the window to keep an eye on the bus driver. When he was far enough, I ran to get out of the bus only to discover in shock and horror that he had locked the door. I was trapped in that bus and no one knew where I was except my boyfriend, the creepy bus driver, and the other bus drivers who saw me leave with him. Still on the phone with my boyfriend, I went back to where I was previously sitting and saw through the window that the creepy bus driver was coming back. When he saw me on the phone, he left and locked the bus again. He did this circus back and forth a total of 3 times, locking the bus behind him every time. But the last time he stayed near the bus, so I hung up with my boyfriend and decided to text him instead. At some point I sat on another seat to keep an eye on the creepy bus driver, and through the window I saw and heard an elderly woman who asked him if his bus was going to city nearest to my boyfriend's house, and he deliberately lied to her, telling her that it would be another bus. At this point I was freaking out, frantically texting my boyfriend that I was going to die, that the bus driver would do terrible things to me, then kill me and throw my body away. It was at this moment that the bus driver went back in the bus and locked the door again. We were supposed to leave in less than 10 minutes and suddenly something finally snapped in my brain. I got up, trying to maintain a calm appearance, and lied to him about how I need to go back to the train station to go to the bathroom. He told me that there were bathrooms in the bus, then I lied again saying that I needed some snacks from the vending machine. He hesitated and finally accepted to let me go, but before he did so he pretended twice that the button to open the doors wasn't working, and at this point I didn't care about hiding my distress anymore. I told him that if he couldn't open the door I'd pick the emergency hammer to break the door, and suddenly the button was working again. I bolted out of the bus and took the deepest breath of cold, fresh winter air I've ever took. I've never been in prison, but I imagine that what it feels like to be released from prison. I then ran up to the train station, hid behind a vending machine, and when I finally felt safe, I bursted in tears. I called my boyfriend back and he told me that he called his sister who lived in Versailles that her boyfriend would come and pick me. While I was trying to calm myself, guess who I saw coming in the train station? The creepy bus driver. He was acting like he was looking for something, or rather, someone, and that was likely me. I held my breath and waited for him to leave and then cry some more because I realized at that moment that I was his prey and I was right about his bad intentions. Finally, the boyfriend of my boyfriend's sister came and took me back to where I live, and I couldn't sleep that night or the following days. My insomnia worsened. I made a signaling to the bus company, but since he wasn't a usual driver for them, nothing was done and I didn't even receive an answer. I am very grateful for everyone who helped me that night, and I know it has been said before, but let me say it again as a reminder. Trust your guts. Trust your instincts. They're never wrong. Also, FXCK being polite with creeps that make you feel uncomfortable/unsafe/uneasy. Thank you for your time and attention. Stay safe everyone and have a nice life. P.S. Sorry for all the possible mistakes. It is currently past 5 a.m. I've been writing for more than an hour, and though I'm fluent in English, it's not my first language. Story 6. Date invited me to a fake barbecue and then wouldn't let me leave. House had a soundproof music studio in the basement. Bye. Feral_doves. I'm so sorry this is so long. Maybe I included too much detail. I don't know. I don't post very often. I'll put a TLDR at the end. This took place a while ago, 2015-ish, but I'll probably never forget it. I, around 21 at the time, was still fairly new in my city. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship, wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know a lot of people in town besides my ex and his friends. I was on a dating/hookup app looking for people to hang out casually with, maybe find a FWB or something. I had matched with a 25-year-old guy, Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days. He explained he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music. It was just audio on YouTube with a heavily edited still image of 4 or 5 guys playing rock instruments. One of them looked like him. The music was an interesting combination of styles and not really for me, but whatever, he seemed like a nice enough guy. He stopped replying for a few days and I figured that was that, moved on. Then one day I was at work and got a message from him saying sorry he'd been so busy and inviting me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in their yard. He had explained that their band manager was providing them the house to live in. Based on the lack of views on the YouTube video and the fact I only saw one photo of him playing in the band, I figured he was probably exaggerating the band manager thing. I thought it was more likely something along the lines of a bar manager friend giving them a discount on rent in exchange for being a house band at their bar or something, and didn't think much of it beyond that. Normally I would have just said no to going to a barbecue alone at the home of someone I really didn't know. But I was really bored and figured I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends there, since he made it sound like a pretty big party. I put the neighborhood he gave me into maps, and it was a suburban or with lots of families as far as I knew. I figured being in a yard on such a nice summer day wouldn't be overly risky because lots of neighbors would be outside. Plus it was just a few train stops away from my workplace and I was off in a few hours. I did tell him I wasn't overly comfortable with the idea since I didn't know him well, but I would stop by for a bit if I didn't need to go inside the house at all. He said that was totally fine, which made me feel a lot better. I even made sure to not drink anything for the rest of my shift so I wouldn't be risking needing to go inside to use the bathroom. I was anxious about just showing up to a barbecue with people I didn't know at all, as he implied that the event was already underway. Plus I would have had a hard time finding a specific address from the backyard side, so I asked Simon if he could meet me at the train station since he said it was a quick walk anyway. He agreed to do that, and I let him know when I was leaving work and what time maps said the train would get to his station. I sent Simon a message to tell him that I had arrived at the train station around 5:30 after I looked around and couldn't find him. He told me he was running behind and to just start walking toward the neighborhood. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I saw him slowly wandering toward me. I recognized his clothes, wearing bell-bottoms when they were not common, especially for men, and long hair from far away, but up close his face looked pretty different from his photos. It might have been some heavy-duty editing, I don't even know, but he kinda looked like a different guy. Older looking than the 25-year-old guy in the photos by 5 to 10 years. Maybe used photos of his brother or something, I don't even know, it was before AI. This was the first real red flag, but I brushed it off. Maybe he's just self-conscious, maybe he smokes a lot and doesn't wear sunscreen and hasn't taken pictures in a while. All of his pictures looked candid, so I figured he wasn't much of a selfie guy. And besides, I'm mostly here to make friends anyway, so I shouldn't judge his appearance so harshly. He was also clearly already drunk, but a lot of my ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem strange. He's hosting a barbecue after all. The second red flag came shortly after when we arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house, but he assured me we would just have to walk through to get to the backyard. Okay, fine. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard. We would have had to backtrack to the main road to go down the alley directly to the backyard. I figured he just forgot what I said about not wanting to go inside and didn't want to cause a bunch of trouble, so I went with it. We got in the house and he immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and knob behind me. I didn't think that was too weird since nobody was hanging out inside and a lot of people are just in the habit of locking the door when they come in, but it did still give me the heebie-jeebies for some reason. Then Simon then told me he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined and reminded him that I was just there for the barbecue. He said that he and his bandmates had worked really hard to get the house and he was really proud of it. At that point I was getting really skeptical because usually when guys would tell me things that seemed a bit far-fetched, they'd let the truth slip by the time they got me to their house. But still, I convinced myself that I was being unreasonable. I was already in the stupid house anyway. He insisted it'd be quick. Not the wisest choice, I know. But I was pretty good at explaining away red flags, so at this point Simon still mostly had a dopey stoner art guy kind of vibe as far as I was concerned. He really didn't seem like a threat, just an insecure oddball who sucks at communicating and fibs a bit. Not unlike my ex, who was definitely emotionally and verbally abusive, but it never escalated past that. I figured at worst he'd get handsy and I'd get called a prude for not sleeping with him. I didn't have a lot of self-worth at the time obviously, so I went with it. The tour started pretty uneventfully other than that the decor in the common areas was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast and not a bunch of guys in a band or their fake band manager. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse. On one hand he was clearly lying. But on the other, it made me think it was probably just someone's mom's house and she was out of town and he didn't want to tell me he lived at a friend's parents' home and didn't actually have a paying job. Again, total red flag, but I could rationalize it at the time. The bedroom doors were all closed. Bathroom was unremarkable. He then showed me the kitchen and I finally saw through the window that there was nobody in the backyard. There weren't even barbecue supplies around. No burgers falling on the counter, no cocktail supplies lying around, nothing. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue, and he told me that his bandmates were on tour still. They were just running behind due to band trouble, but they should be back any minute so we could start the party. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them if he's in the band. I don't even remember what his answer was to that because it didn't make any sense. At this point, I'm out of mental gymnastics to convince myself that this guy isn't just completely full of shit, and I'm really freaked out. Took me long enough. I'm smarter now, don't worry. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. I hoped that once he was done the tour, we could go outside, even just for a minute, and I'd just leave. I've been in some sketchy situations in the past, but luckily nothing so bad that they tried very hard to physically stop me when I walked away in a semi-public place. I just wasn't comfortable doing it inside the house. I knew this guy was full of shit, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. I instinctively pretended to believe his bullshit. He offered me a beer. I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning. He said okay and cracked one for himself. Then he wanted to take the tour downstairs. I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was the dark and creepy kind with really small windows, so I refused. I asked if we could go back outside. He said after the tour. I tried to argue about going into the basement, told him I have a spider phobia, don't like basements, etc. All lies, but anything that wouldn't let him realize that he was what I was afraid of. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured it would be better to just let him show me the damn basement and then hopefully we could go outside because I really didn't know what else to do. The basement was fairly unremarkable. Couch, TV, elliptical. Until I noticed something that gave me chills. The house was probably built in the 1990s or late 80s at the absolute earliest, but I saw a door that looked just like the heavy, foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house. The kind that only opened from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges. It looked really out of place in this house. I would absolutely not go anywhere near that door. He opened it and told me it was their soundproof music studio. I looked inside from a few meters away. It did indeed look soundproof. It was about the size of a bedroom and I could see a few guitars and amps in it. Mattress toppers on the walls. No drum kit or recording equipment that I could see. He insisted I go inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door motioning for me to go inside. Holy shit, the alarm bells are really going off now. At this point I realized I could totally die here if I'm not careful and I turned around to run up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me, asking what's wrong, acting like I'm being all unreasonable for not wanting to see his soundproof music studio. So I'm realizing that this is a way sketchier situation than any of my ex's bullshit and I'm freaked right out. At that point my main objective was getting out of the house. The front and back doors were both closed and locked, so if I tried to run he'd be able to get to me before I could get the locks open. The bathroom did not have a window. The house had a convoluted floor plan that I wasn't familiar with and he was much bigger than I am. He was the tall, lanky type, who can run fast even if they're out of shape and smoke a pack a day. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit. We made small talk for a few minutes. He cracked another beer and thankfully he calmed down. I desperately mentioned yet again that it was beautiful outside and suggested we go sit in the yard while we wait. He said no and started to get agitated that I wanted to leave already. I told him that I could stay, but I'd just really like to smoke a cigarette. He told me that we could smoke cigarettes inside, and pointed to a cereal bowl full of cigarette butts. God damn it. We sat down at the table and lit some cigarettes. As he was smoking, he started rolling a joint, which he promptly lit as soon as his cig was done. He offered me some and I said no thanks. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff I could. I'm a pretty seasoned weed smoker, but I pretended to cough excessively and told him I'm a novice, so that's more than enough for me. For a liar himself, he thankfully wasn't very good at picking up on the lies of others. After we smoked, he asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates get back. I told him that I was really looking forward to spending the day outside and suggested we go for a walk or visit the park. Ideas he did not like or appreciate. At this point, I was trying to keep as much distance as possible between us, but he stayed close enough to me that I could smell the beer on his breath. He grabbed me by the waist and I backed away and asked about the barbecue food to try and change the subject and make him think I still believed what he was telling me. He started to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates should be home any minute, and my anxiety was absolutely through the roof. I tried to calm him down again with generic small talk. Now I don't know how I got so lucky, but the next thing that happened might have saved me. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer and pulled out an empty box. At this point, he's getting even more pissed off than before, so I went out on a limb and suggested we go get some more beer for the party. Because I was out of ideas. I was terrified that it would enrage him even more to suggest, once again, that we leave the house, but I had to try. Thankfully though, his eyes lit up with the possibility that I could actually be down to drink with him, and he agreed. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan because I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this fucking menace in this weirdly desolate suburb. But I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I walked with him to the liquor store, and when we got there told him I didn't need to go inside if he was just gonna go grab some beer. He insisted that I had to go inside. At that point I was so stressed and frazzled I just went with him and hoped that a good opportunity to leave would arise. When we got inside the liquor store, he asked what kind of beer I wanted. I reminded him that I had to work tomorrow and didn't want to drink much. He demanded to know what kind of beer I wanted, so I just named the first one that came to mind. We went to pay. The cashier was kind of an asshole, so I didn't ask for help. I probably should have, but I panicked and didn't. I hoped there might be somebody in the parking lot who might help me if I made a scene, but there was nobody. I really regretted not asking the liquor store guy for help, but also remembered the times my ex told people I was crazy so they wouldn't take me seriously. Liquor store guy definitely seemed like he would have fell for that, so probably for the best I didn't expect him to help me. I had one last idea before I took my chances just trying to run and or scream. There was a drugstore across from the liquor store. I told Simon I had to go buy a toothbrush or some shit that vaguely implied I might stay over. He eagerly agreed to this but tried to follow me into the store. I told him that you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I don't know if that's even true. I really doubt it's any kind of law, but luckily this drunk douchebag believed it and agreed to wait outside. Now, my naive ass thought maybe I could just wander around in this drugstore for long enough and he would either get the hint or get sketched out or bored and leave. But no, I must have wandered around the store for at least half an hour and this jackass is still just standing there staring in the window. This creep didn't even have his phone out. Every time I checked if he was still there, he was just staring through the window looking for me. I didn't feel like I had anybody I could call in the city to come help me. The cops here don't usually take things like this very seriously, and the store workers looked like they were mostly high school students, and I didn't want to drag them into this, so I really didn't feel like I had a lot of options. After being in there for so long, I was surprised he didn't come in to see what was taking me so long. I thought maybe I could lose him in the aisles and sneak out of the store if he did come in, but no. I ended up hovering around the tills and waited until a big group of friendly-looking people were paying. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly enough to imply that I would make a scene if need be. Simon looked at the people getting in their car, who were now pausing and looking at us because I had nearly yelled at him, and then he just turned around and left. It was bizarrely anticlimactic, which I was very thankful for. I ran to the train station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house from the store, and I never heard from him again. When I got home, his app profile had either blocked me or been deleted. Years later, after I stopped compartmentalizing the whole thing, I wish I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again with someone else but made sure the fridge was stocked first. But at the time I didn't think anybody would take me seriously. I was embarrassed of my choices, and I just wanted to move on from the whole thing. Plus, all I really had was a, likely fake, first name and a general idea of where the house was, which probably wasn't even his. I'll probably never know any more than I do now, and maybe that's for the best. Anyway, Simon, you lying POS, let's not meet. TLDR, in my early 20s I met a man on a hookup app and agreed to go to a barbecue he and his bandmates were hosting at their house in the suburbs. When I met up with him he was really drunk, looked different from his photos, his bandmates were nowhere to be found, and the decor in the house didn't look like it was theirs. He locked the door and got angry every time I asked to go outside. After a tour of the house that included a soundproof music studio and no evidence of a barbecue, I was able to escape by suggesting we visit the liquor store together after he ran out of beer, and telling him to leave me alone once we were around a group of people. Edit, yeah, I'm gonna make it even longer. Sumi, hey everyone, thanks for reading my story, and thanks to everyone who had left comments and feedback. I really didn't know what to expect when I posted this, but your kind words truly mean a lot. I tend to process things by writing them out and rereading them over and over, so this was my way of moving past the whole thing, and I'm glad I shared it, and I'm shocked by how many people have enjoyed reading it. I'm sorry to hear about how many of you have experienced similar things, but your stories have helped me forgive myself. I feel like if this story has helped anyone feel less alone in having gone through something similar, or even just used it as a distraction from the stressful things in their own life, then something positive has come from it. Just please don't be afraid to meet people or go on dates. Be cautious, be curious. But you don't need to be fearful. This situation was not normal at all. I'm also really surprised and flattered by how many messages I've been getting about using this story for podcasts and videos, but I don't really sign into Reddit often enough to reply to all of them, so if you want to use it, just go ahead. Don't forget to share. Tell me your favorite story of today and subscribe for more stories on my page. Hese 2 I think you will enjoy. Thank you.